So welcome everyone to today's webinar, Fusion 360 Organic Modelling using Sculpting. My name is Matthew McKnight. I'm a technical sales specialist with Autodesk and thank you for joining us today. Let's get stuck straight into this. Firstly, a little bit about myself. I'm recently joined Autodesk. But come with about 15 years of engineering experience. I'm a mechanical engineer by profession, which makes it a little bit unusual maybe for me to be conducting a webinar of this type today, particularly dedicated to advanced surfacing and freeform surfacing. But I suppose this is testament to how easy it is to use some of the sculpting tools with inside of Fusion 360. If you need to contact me, my details are up on the screen there. Feel free to message me after the webinar if you have any further questions or you'd like us to connect through and answer any specific problems that you're having. This is the second in a series of webinars that we're running, the first of which was run last week, looking at the basics of using Fusion 360. This webinar is surrounding the sculpting tools, and then next week and the week after we'll be running further webinars to do with visualizing your designs, and then you can use some of the manufacturing tools with inside of Fusion 360. So if you'd like to join these, here's a short link that'll give you access to the sign-up forms, enabling you to to sign up to these and participate in the webinars. Otherwise, I'll have this link up towards the end of the webinar as well. So our first area that we'll look at is what is Fusion 360, a little bit about the background of Fusion 360, some of the issues that it solves. We'll look at Sculpt and Freeform and give you an introduction into those areas. After we've done the introduction, we'll bring it all together by working through some practical examples. I'll spend a little bit of time with you looking through where you can find some further information around some of the tools that we look at today and broader Fusion 360. And then I'll answer any questions that you might have regarding the content of today or anything else surrounding Fusion 360. If you do have any questions, please post them via the GoToWebinar dialog box. If I don't answer them during the webinar, it's because I'm busy delivering the content and concentrating on what I'm doing. And if we run out of time at the end of the day and I haven't got a chance to answer them, I will answer them either later on this afternoon or in the next day or two. So please feel free to ask any questions you might have. Okay, so what is Fusion 360? Well, Fusion 360 is one system, one user interface. It brings all of the tools that you would require to design products of various different types. So it enables you to design, test, and fabricate inside the one environment, one tool. It enables you to work anywhere because it's device independent. So whether you're working on a tablet, a workstation, your phone, and no matter whether you're in the office or maybe you're working remotely, Fusion 360 in combination with A360 enables you to work effectively anywhere you need to. And it also, further to this, enables you to collaborate with anyone. And this is important in current times where we've transitioned away from some of the traditional design methodology, which was engineers and designers locked away in offices at the back of a factory. Now they're front of office, they're integrated in much more of the business processes of a company, and they're engaging with their customers more often. So this collaborative environment enables you to access and engage with effectively anyone and anywhere. Okay. So that's our brief introduction to Fusion 360. Let's move on now and have a look at the Sculpt and Freeform tools that we have access to inside of Fusion 360. A little bit of looking at these tools. So last week we did an introduction and we looked at the various different workspaces within inside of Fusion 360, the ability to be able to model, simulate, manufacture your parts. Well, that's one of the key advantages to using Fusion 360 with the Sculpt tools embedded, is because Sculpt by itself is good, but it can be a complicated process if you've got to incorporate multiple tools to get there. So if you think, okay, well, if we've got sculpt and patch being better, and that means that effectively we've got the ability to be able to sculpt our parts, use the patch tools that enable us to create advanced surfaces and very precision surfaces. So that provides better tools or a better functionality to create the geometry that we want to. But then when we bring in model as well, so we can sculpt, surface, and model, this is really the best environment for us to be creating all of these organic free-form surfaces. If we look a little bit about the sculpt background, so what's the technology behind it? Well, it uses technology called T-splines, which was an Autodesk acquisition a number of years ago. It's effectively a special CAD surface that enables you to utilize techniques and technology that you may have not been able to use using traditional CAD tools. Some of these special CAD surfaces are non-rectangular topology. You can easily edit extremely complex models. In many cases, you can create extremely complex models that would be very, very difficult to create using traditional modeling techniques. It incorporates technology such as T-points and start points. And the great thing is it's NURBS compatible, which means that you can integrate it then back in with the rest of the workflow, coming back then to patch and more of your generic modeling techniques. So my first quick tip before we get stuck into demonstrating the product is keep it simple. So we must always remember this. And a good example is if we consider a box when we're working inside of the sculpt environment. A box can be modeled in two ways. It can be modeled as a simple form on the left, shown in the green, or as a complex form on the right, shown in the red. And we'll step through the consequences of doing this in our subsequent practical examples. But what you will find is that the best way of starting off is simple and adding complexity to the design rather than starting complex and trying to simplify your design. So let's kick it off by jumping into Fusion 360 and stepping through some practical examples. And I'll just drag my Fusion onto the screen. So in this first case, what we'll do is I'm going to grab just a component, a generic component that I've prepared and created in preparation for this. And the only thing that I've done in this case is just define some sketches in the background that we'll use a little bit later on through the process of this webinar. In the first case though, what I want to show to you is that, and I won't go through too much of the introduction, but across the top of the screen we have all these environments from the toolbar. So we've got our model environment where we can access a lot of our generic modeling tools such as extrudes, sweeps, ribs, holes, threads and the likes. We've got our patch environment which enables us to access things like surfaces, sweeps, lofts, stitches, scale and the like. And then we can move in through to some of our other areas that we won't touch on really today, which is render, animation, sim and cam. So if we just go back to the model environment, one thing that you will notice is that up on the create area we've got two icons. We've got the box icon and we've got the create form icon. The create form icon is the T-splines environment. So if I click on this, it actually brings up, if you're first time to entering this environment, it'll bring up a little dialog box that says you've entered the sculpt environment. Use the finish button to return to the solid modeling. So once we've entered this environment, I'll select OK for now. We'll deselect that a little later on. You'll note that this environment changes slightly. Not only have we now got a sculpt environment area, but you'll also note that a number of the tools have changed. So we can create some T-spline objects. So we've got boxes, cylinders, pipes and the likes. And we can modify our geometry in different ways. So we've got things like subdivide and crease and pull and match. So these are things that we may not necessarily have seen inside of some of our other tools. And this is really coming back to where it segregates the fact that this tool, Fusion 360, solves the problem of being able to do all of your design processes with inside the one environment. So let's have a quick look at how we can create some geometry inside of here. So in the first instance, all I'm going to do is choose the box icon from the top of our screen. Let's just make sure we're click on the icon, and now I'm going to just draw a generic box. So you'll note here that the box can be any size or shape, and if I wanted to, even before I went there, I can click on center point. So rather than it being a 2-point box, I could have a center point box, choose the face, or in this case the plane, and then specify the size. So in this case, maybe we want it to be not quite so big. We've got it almost 2 meters long, so we'll make it 200 by 100 by 75. And I'll just zoom in so that we can see our geometry. So here it is here. So we've defined the geometry. We can step through using the dialog boxes on the screen as well. The other thing that you'll note that we can do is that we can manipulate the geometry on the screen directly. So I can grab the sliders and enable us to modify the geometry of the box using these manipulators that are quick and easy to drag out to specific sizes that we might be looking for. The other thing that you'll notice is that this box is actually divided up into sub-surfaces. So you can see here, and these are all the T-spline surfaces that are creating the box. We can subdivide that surface up into more T-spline surfaces just by sliding the little manipulators on our triad here. So I can add additional or remove additional faces by manipulating this geometry very quickly and easily. Once I've done with my box, I can hit OK, and you'll now note that we've just created a simple little form. In exiting this environment, I will then switch back into the traditional modeling environment where I could go and, say, shell this part or add some extrudes or cuts to it. So this, in essence, is effectively like any other solid that's been created. Note that it adds a sculpt feature to our timeline. So if I want to edit this sculpt feature, I can just double click or edit it. Again, it's reminding us that we're going inside the sculpt environment. I'm going to turn that dialog box off so we no longer see it. And you'll note now that we're back inside the sculpt environment, enabling us then to manipulate this geometry. So we can do this with any of these basic forms that we've got across the top of the screen. And these, more often than not, will be the basis for the start of our geometry, as we'll illustrate through some examples a little bit later on. Let's just hide that and then show you some other geometry that we can create. So I'm going to turn on a sketch. So we've got this sketch we've created. It's just a 2-dimensional sketch, and we'll now move into our create form environment where I can access my revolve tool. So through here I can quickly and easily go in and select a sketch and axis, and you'll note that we get a very similar dialog box as what we've seen before. So here's our profile that we've selected. Here's our axis of revolution. We can change the spacing of the faceting of the surfaces. So rather than having curvature based, so you can see here that it's weighted towards the curvature of the surface. So where we've got a high degrees of curvature, then we'll have more breakage of our surface. In this case, we can make it uniform. So we get uniform distribution of those surfaces along its length. You can also adjust the number of faces here as well. Again, we can add things like symmetry here. So if we're looking at modifying our part and making some manipulation, you can add things like circular symmetry to this design or having none. So very quickly and easily, we're able to create, in this case, a basic form. Let's turn that one off, and we can finish our form environment. Oh, actually, one thing you'll notice when we exit the form environment, it actually converts it to a surface, a NURB surface that we can then use with our traditional tools. So for some of those advanced surfaces that you've seen, it will actually do a nice conversion, a smooth conversion from the surface that was shown to that inside the modeling environment. Let's quickly turn that off and turn on maybe a sweep. And let's create a quick sweep along. So we've got a two-dimensional rectangular shaped sketch along a three-dimensional spline. So I'll go inside my create form. Again, it's not much to this sweep. Choose our profile, which is that one here. Choose our path, which will be this one here. And you can see here we've quickly created the geometry. Again, we can have the face spacing uniform or based on the curvature of the part. We can increase the number of faces that we're creating, and likewise, very quickly and easily we've created what would otherwise be a very complex surface to create using traditional tools. And finally, just finishing off, let's do a loft and have a look at how our loft will generate. So let's go into create, loft, we'll choose one profile, choose the other profile, and you can see here that we've created a loft between those two, but we can also add a rail. I'm going to make sure that I'm turning on the centerline rail here, because the path that I've got is a centerline, and you can quickly create that rail. We can again go through and modify some of the parameters, but in this case I just want to illustrate the fact that we can very quickly and easily create reasonably complex surfaces. Now, a lot of you might be arguing that sorry, I'll just... Okay, so a lot of you might be arguing, well, we can do that using a lot of our traditional tools, and you're correct. So let's have a look at how Fusion 360 and the Sculpt environment really segregates itself away from that traditional surfacing techniques. And this is through the use of things like geometry manipulation, and in this case we'd be using the manipulators. I'll step through the process of being able to scale, move, rotate and the likes directly, so you'll get a bit of an understanding about there. And also we'll step through a number of different display settings that will enable us to understand the form that we're creating and the ways that we can manipulate this form as well. So let's have a look at our next example. I'll switch back into Fusion. And I might just start on a new design here. And let's create a form, a box on the top. Let's create something about that. And like we've said, we can manipulate it on our screen. So maybe we want it to be 50 by 100 by 150 by, I don't know, 50. So we've got our geometry on our screen. The next thing I want to do is show you how we can use the manipulators. So we've seen how we can use the manipulators to create or modify the initial form. But what we want to do here is we want to be able to modify that form. So say for instance, we've created a form, we exit the form environment, we realize actually we want to make some changes. Well, remember we can go in and edit that form. And inside of here you'll notice we've got the edit form icon inside the modify menu. Now if I click on that, and I'll show you firstly, there's a number of features and functionality that we can use with inside this environment, but predominantly the edit form is the most likely one. You'll probably be using this 95 or 98% of the time. So if we use this, you'll notice that we can then go through and click on various entities. Now the edit form dialog box has a number of different parameters associated with it when working inside this environment. So just be careful of the way that you've got this set up, because you might be in that, like when I went to open that up, I automatically had the body selection selected, but I actually want to be able to select any geometry within inside this environment, so I've changed that to all. So let's just first click on, say, on a face. So if I click on the face, you'll note that we get a manipulator that pops up on the screen. This manipulator enables us to quickly and easily modify the geometry to suit the shape of our product. And we can manipulate it using a number of different techniques. So we can push and pull and move and scale and rotate this geometry around. So I can select faces, I can select edges, I can select vertexes, but I can also select bodies as well, which is one thing that we don't talk of much, but you can do that as well. So I can move around here and say pull that face up, and you'll see that It's actually modifying the geometry to suit our requirement. If I wanted to maybe shift the face across, I could do that as well. So just using the manipulators here, the arrow manipulators, enable me to move and reposition that face relative to the rest of the geometry. I can move it with precision as well. So if I wanted to move it in the X direction, say 10 mil, then I can just use the dialog box to enter that amount as well. So clicking on any arrow will then bring up the dialog box associated with it, or clicking on any entity will bring up the dialog box associated with it, enabling you then to move it with specific precision. Further to that, we can then say move the face along a plane. So rather than it being in one dimension, we can actually move it across 2 dimensions. So I can move this, in this case, up and to the right. And likewise, I can move it up to the left, or I can move it to the right and the left, but not up. So there's a number of things that I can do. Further to that, I can also rotate. So if I wanted to, I can rotate those surfaces around using the handles on the screen and a number of different axes to get the geometry that I want. And finally to that, I can then scale the geometry as well. So if I wanted to scale the geometry up, I can grab these little line handles that enable me to scale. This is scaled in 1 dimension. If I grab the corner scale and drag that, I can scale it in 2 dimensions. Okay. So we can manipulate our geometry very quickly and very easily. Like I said, if I want to, I can choose not only faces, but I can choose, say, a point or a vertex and move that point in relation or independent of any other point. Now, one thing that I will go back and show you is that when we create this form, and I'm just stepping back through using Control Z, which is our undo feature, which should effectively take us back to where we started, which is there. One thing that we can do is we can turn on symmetry. So we can turn on symmetry when we create the basic shape, but we can also create it or add symmetry after the shape has been created. So in this case, I can turn on symmetry, and it's looking for me to select 2 faces. So in this case, I'll choose those 2 faces. You can see it's given me a preview of where the symmetry will be about. And subsequently, if I then use that symmetry, you'll note that now when using the move or modify manipulator, if I'm making a change to one side of my geometry, I'm automatically making a change to the other side as well. So this will help you if you're making symmetrical objects and you're modeling both halves, maybe in one go, as the ability to be able to manipulate your geometry on both sides equally. Okay, again, exiting the form will then bring us back into the environment. Again, I'm just going to repeat on some of these things. The final thing that I will talk to you about is your, actually I'm not sure that I will talk about it just yet. No, I'll talk about it a little bit later. I'll talk about display settings in the next example. So let's just step back into our presentation. Okay, so moving on, let's have a look at some of the next features and functionality we want to talk about, and that's coordinates and filters, where we'll cover things like working in world space or local coordinates, and then also how we can filter through and select and group entities such as vertices, edges, faces, bodies, and all. We'll also look at some of the shortcut selection tools that you can use. Now these will be dependent upon whether you're using Windows or whether you're using Apple or Mac. So there is some differences between the 2 products there. So let's quickly move back into Fusion again. And I'll start another new design. And we'll create a form, create a box. Let's draw it here. Drag it up. And you'll notice the reason why it's, when I'm dragging it, it's equally dragging top and bottom is because we've got symmetric selected. We could just do one-sided. So turning on symmetric makes it symmetric about the plane that we originally created the sketch on. You'll note that we can turn on symmetry here and we can add symmetry, and this is going back to what we were talking about previously. So if I want the part to be symmetrical from, say, side to side or top to bottom, I can do that. I can be width symmetry, or I can be height symmetry. In this case, we'll actually use some height symmetry in this example and just go OK. Likewise, if we exited the dialog box, we can simply add symmetry just by going to this environment here. Now, one thing that you'll notice that if we wanted to make some changes to this geometry, like I said before, we typically want to start off simple and then add complexity to our design. So in this instance, maybe we wanted to add some geometry or make some changes to our part, but it was difficult based on the current design. So what we can do is we can modify the geometry by inserting an edge. So in this case, I'm going to insert an edge. Now, so select one edge, I just single click it. Okay, so in this case, we've selected an edge and it's just that local edge of the face. And you can see here that we're going to be inserting, in this instance, an edge that would be between the existing edges of the surface. We can have it on one side or we can have it both. In this case, it doesn't matter because we've got symmetry. If we make a change to one side, it's going to automatically affect the other anyway, so we could just go one side. The other thing is that you can drag that. So if you wanted it to be positioned, biased towards one end, then you can do that. And like we've seen before, you can add in a specific value for it. Okay, so let me just quickly undo that because I didn't want to add just one edge. I wanted to add a series of edges all the way around the part to give us some more precision. So the way that you can group select is by double clicking. So if I double click an edge, it will group select a linked edges. So in that case, it's group selected all of the edges around the outside of our part. And you can see here that we can then manipulate this geometry and add some additional edges and faces in place. The good thing here is then we can add effectively a whole bulk of features and faces inside this area. Let's go ahead and make some modifications. So I'm going to hit my modify command, group select a whole string of entities, and let's just hit the scale icon, and you can see here that we can quickly and easily then scale that object around the center plane very, very quickly. So I've got a completely different object in a few moments. Likewise, if I wanted to, I can drag and manipulate this geometry upwards and downwards to then give us some shape that we wanted to. Now, if you found that, I actually don't want to have its symmetry around the top and bottom, I want these edges across around the top, but I don't necessarily want them around the bottom. In this instance and numerous instances, you can delete edges by group selecting them, and just simply hitting the delete key on your keyboard should delete them. Now, you can't be like I was then. I had the edit form dialog box open. If you try and do that, which was my mistake there, all it's going to do is delete the value out of the modify box. So make sure that you don't have any other commands active at the time. So I can group select a set of edges, hit delete, and you'll see that it'll modify those. In this instance, note that it's transferred them from one end to the other because we are working with symmetry. So to end symmetry, I can clear the symmetry, which will turn that off, and then gives us the ability to be able to then just modify a group of edges like we have there. So in this case, we've removed the symmetry, deleted a string of edges, and now we've got some geometry that we can use to further our design. Okay, let's go back into our presentation and step on to the next section. So working with imported data, and I want to show you some really cool features here. If you're working with imported geometry, you can use it as a basis to create your T-spline surfaces. You can add it, but also want to show you some really cool things around how you can use the delete command inside this environment as well. So let's start off by using or looking at this example here, which is a nozzle. So I'm just going to step back into Fusion. We'll go grab a part that's already been started, and we'll restart some of this part for us. Okay, so here's our geometry. It's a nozzle with a handle in place. Now, this might have been imported from, say, Inventor or another competitive CAD product. And the good thing is that Fusion 360 is extremely flexible when we're working with almost any data type. So I want to show you a few tricks around working with this data. So the first one is that deleting faces. So in this instance, we've got a fillet that runs around the part here. So there's two tips that I want to show you. The first one is traditionally you would maybe select, and I'm just holding down the control key, which enables me to then group select a number of faces. So the way to avoid having to rotate around and select faces in the background, so you know, in some cases it might be called the select other tool, is to click and hold down your left mouse button, and that brings up a dialog box where you can choose any faces or features that are either visible in the foreground or in the background, so hidden from you. So I can select that rear face, holding down my control key, then run around and select all of my other faces, and then simply hit the delete key. Now, like you saw inside the sculpt environment, and we're just inside the model environment here, so we're not inside the sculpt environment, I can quickly and easily just remove geometry like that. So I can delete a string of fillets and not have to worry about patching together surfaces or extending and trimming surfaces. Likewise, let's do this for the rest of the handle. So I can select, say, all of these surfaces now to save me going around to the back of the face and choosing the rear face. I can just simply select it using this select other command, and then we'll hit delete, and you'll note that we've quickly and easily deleted the handle and retained is the solid geometry associated with the top of the part. Now we're going to use this as a basis for then creating a new handle that we want to. So maybe we want to modify the existing handle and create a variant of the design. So let's do that. So let's create a form. Let's create a box like we've done before. Let's create on the plane here. Let's just make sure we've got the plane. Yep. We'll rotate around so we're looking normal to it. I'm just going to create a simple 2-point box. It's symmetric. Let's drag it out, roughly have it in place. So we'll have two faces along the width, which is shown here. We'll have two faces along the height and 6 in this instance, and go OK. We'll make sure we've got symmetry turned on, but like I said, it doesn't really matter. We could have added that as a subsequent feature or function. In this case, we can insert, I want to insert an edge. That's what I want to do, is split these faces up. So we've got a little bit more control. So in this case, what I'm going to do is select insert edge, and I'm going to make sure that they're symmetrical about both sides. We'll make them about halfway between the existing edge and the other edge. Let's add this one in this case and just go OK. If we want to repeat the command, just drag, so right click and drag up, which is repeat insert edge, and then I can click the other edge that I want to add and go OK. So quite quickly and easily we've added additional edges in this case. Let's go back and add our crease, which is here. So it creates a sharp edge, and we can select, how many do we want? We'll choose 1, 2, 3, 4 sharp edges and go OK. And we can now use these by dragging them out. So if I click on this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, and drag that up, you'll see that we get definition. Now this really does highlight the difference between the mistake I was making a little bit earlier and the result that I'm getting now. So you'll note it, and actually I'm going to step back and highlight that because I think that's a reasonably important point to make. So without the edges, if I try and crease those parts and drag them out, I don't get the definition that I want. So if I choose to crease, say, that edge, and that edge, and go OK, and then we modify those 3 edges, 1, 2, 3, and drag those out, you'll note that we're not getting the definition that we want because there's no edge in between these creased edges that give us the position or retain some degree of position relative to their original position. So what we're going to do is, like we saw then, let's add those edges, additional edges in place. So we'll grab that one, go OK, let's repeat it, that one, OK, and let's add the crease. Just quickly. Where are we? Want one. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Drag those out a little bit. I'm holding down the Control key to group select entities in that case, and drag these out in space. And you can see here that we've got now nice defined finger holds for our nozzle. Let's go OK. So we've defined these in position, but it doesn't necessarily look the way that we want it to. So let's manipulate this geometry a little bit further. So I'm going to turn on the modify or the edit form dialog box. And one thing I'm going to show you here is the ability to be able to change the selection options that you've got. So if I wanted to grab together a set of entities, I can select manually, holding down the Control key, a number of, say, faces in this instance. But I can go through and choose various different entities that I want to modify. So maybe I want to grab just the vertex. So in this instance, I could grab just the vertices. Or maybe I want to grab just edges, or maybe faces or bodies. So I can grab these based on filtering. So in this case, maybe I want to, grab a vertice, that one down there, and modify it in isolation of everything else. But more often than not, you might be grabbing a series of them. So we can use some of these selection options here to change the selections that we've chosen. So in this case, we've selected one point, but we can grow that by either clicking on the icon here, or on Windows hitting Shift and up. I think on Apple it's Command and up, which will then grow the vertices that we're selecting here. And you can see it's gone through and it's grabbed a whole bunch of additional vertices, growing those up. We could shrink those down if we didn't want them, the additional ones in place. But we can now use these, and we'll use those to manipulate our geometry. So we'll rotate them. Gives us a nice transition down at the bottom, and we'll position them over a little bit further. So we've got a sort of a little bit of a change, an arc to the end of our handle. Now the one thing that you'll note is that one of our vertices didn't move, and that's because when we used our grow command it actually didn't grab that vertice. You can more clearly see this if we use our display mode. Now display mode is shown down the bottom of our selection options. Display mode by default in here is shown as smooth display, but I can switch between other displays to look at some of the the background of the surfaces and what's happening with the surfaces as we're changing them. So you'll note here that I can turn on the control frame, and the control frame gives us the ability to then be able to choose, rather than choosing, say, vertices and faces of our geometry, we're actually choosing vertices and faces of the model that's creating the geometry. Likewise, I can turn on the display, change the display mode to box display, and you can see here quite clearly that one of the vertices wasn't actually moved. So I can select that vertice. I'm going to rotate around so that I'm repositioned, and let's just move that along the plane roughly back into position with the other. Likewise, I'm going to change my selection filter maybe to edge if I wanted to just select a couple of edges. And I can then move that edge to be more in position relative to where I want it to be. You'll note that there's a string of edges around here that I might want to change, so I can group select them and then maybe change the angle that they're sitting on, maybe reposition them as well a little bit. So we can go through and incrementally modify our geometry to suit what we're trying to do here. And likewise, maybe I want to go back and just choose a series of points along our part and then move those in a little bit so that we get a little bit more maybe rounding. Now, if we want to, we can switch between all of these display modes to have a look at all the consequences in each environment. Okay, one of the last things we'll do is let's make a final change. I'm going to select the body and let's make a change to the whole body. So at the moment it looks a little bit thick and I want to reposition it. So let's change the scale through the part. So we'll adjust the width scale. Let's choose this scale here slightly. Let's rotate it around so it's maybe on a slightly different angle, maybe a bit too much there. Let's position it maybe towards the front or back a little bit more so we can see it in relation to the top part there. Maybe move it up slightly to make sure that we've got plenty of engagement between the two parts. Go OK, and we're now basically ready to combine these two bodies. Now to do that, we can finish the form. So we're exiting this environment, go over, we can then modify these by combining them. Modify them by combining them. So we can combine the two bodies. So this new body that we've created using the sculpt tools can be treated like any other solid body, and then we can add a, say, a fillet around the geometry as well. Give it a 10mm fillet, something nice and chunky. Doesn't want to work in that case. Maybe try something a little bit smaller. There you go. So we've quickly and easily added a handle to suit our geometry. We've added a fillet in there, and that all works well. Now quickly, just finishing off something that I talked about a little bit earlier, and that is the delete command. The delete command inside of Fusion 360 is extremely powerful, better than I've seen any other CAD system handle especially imported geometry. So in this case, if we've imported a part, this is just a simple maybe plastic part, we want to delete out the hole in the center of it. I just highlight the two surfaces, hit the delete key, and it removes that geometry from our part. The other thing that I can do is that was a reasonably simple delete, but in this case, towards the back of our part, it's much more complex. So we've got a lot of fillets and surfaces, and we're cutting in through multiple thicknesses there, so that you can see there's a transition in place. So what we can do is we can select all of those. Now I've created a selection set that just saves me the time of running around and selecting all those faces. But in this instance, you could select them individually, and then hitting delete will then remove all of those faces. So very quickly and easily we can work with imported data inside this environment, enabling us then to use that with our sculpt tools. Okay, so let's bring this all together and have a quick recap on what we've talked of today. Remember, keep it simple is really the essence of using our sculpt tools inside of Fusion 360. Work with things like display settings to help enable you understand the changes that you're making and the consequences of them. Take advantage of the combined design methods, so the ability to be able to use your sculpt, your patch, and your model environments collectively. Deleting faces, whether it be in deleting edges, really, is one of the key tools that I just absolutely love about Fusion, working inside of Fusion 360. Remember your selection shortcuts so to help you cut down on the number of picks and clicks that you're making, then use some of your selection shortcuts. The match bodies, where we can match, say, the water bottle with our lid. Remember that you can match these surfaces with existing geometry, and explore the tools. There are numerous tools that we haven't even touched on today inside this session. There's just not enough time, but please look at what tools are available inside this environment to use. If you want some further reading, remember that you can also go to the Fusion 360 forums. There is a lot of support, both community and from the development team for Fusion 360 inside here. And remember, you can also access the latest information on Fusion 360 within Twitter, also from Facebook and YouTube if you want to. So there's some really great YouTube videos available. Further to this, remember we also have a local Future of Making Things group on LinkedIn. Please, if you haven't already joined it, go and join it. It's great. We're putting some really interesting content up there that's relevant to Australian manufacturing, Australian New Zealand manufacturing. And like I said at the start, if you've got any questions, I know there's been a couple of questions during the session. If you've got any further questions relating to Fusion 360, don't hesitate to shoot me an email, give me a call, or connect with me in one of your preferred formats. Otherwise, remember we also have 2 additional webinars coming up. We've got a Visualize Your Designs webinar next week, and then the following week we've got our manufacturing webinar focused on 3D printing and CAM. You can access the sign up for these at this location. That is an O, not a 0, so it's 10DN6RJ. Please feel free to go there and sign up. And a little known fact is that if you are a product design suite subscriber, you have to be on active subscription, then you already have access to Fusion 360. Just do a Google search for Fusion 360 access for Product Design Suite subscribers, and that'll send you to a link where you can access the the step-by-step guide on how you can access Fusion 360 using your existing account. Otherwise, thank you for your time. I'll get to our questions after this session, and I hope you have a great day and you found the content valuable. Thanks for your time. Bye-bye.